It's a building material that insulates, fireproofs, and is practically indestructible. It's also deadly. Noted for its strength, asbestos has been popular in building materials like insulation and joint compounds. It was also used in brake pads, clutches, and in and around boilers and pumps. Hundreds of different products were made with asbestos, but it's toxic for those who work with or around these products. Even though it's a natural mineral, exposure to asbestos can lead to a rare and deadly cancer called mesothelioma. As an aeronautical engineer for the Air Force in the 1950s and 1960s, Paul Sizz was exposed to asbestos.
There were areas that I worked in that involved products that had asbestos in them. But again, in the 50s and 60s, it was not even a concern of mine. I really didn't pay much attention to the fact that they were asbestos-containing materials. That was a question we didn't ask. We thought it was a safe material.
It wasn't until decades later that Paul was diagnosed with mesothelioma. Experts call this delay in symptoms the latency period, and for mesothelioma, it's usually between 15 and 40 years.
Mesothelioma is a malignant tumor of the outside lining of the lungs and the inside lining of the chest walls. It also can occur in the abdomen, around the bowel, or in the peritoneum, which is the inside lining of the abdominal wall. Principal cause is asbestos, the inhalation of asbestos fibers or the swallowing of asbestos fibers. These fibers then get transported out to the surface of the lung or out to the surface of the bowel, and over time, over many years usually, they can occasionally, rarely, result in this malignant tumor, mesothelioma.
In the early 1900s, manufacturers of asbestos products began expressing concerns about asbestos exposure. Despite these concerns, workers and the public in general were never properly warned of the true risks of asbestos exposure. Many people are just now being diagnosed with asbestos disease. Often, people who are diagnosed with mesothelioma never even knew they had come in contact with asbestos. For instance, the spouses of people who have never been exposed can develop the disease after washing asbestos-covered clothes. Sometimes, parents who have worked with asbestos products carry that asbestos home to their children, and those children develop mesothelioma. It's only years later that the exposure reveals itself.
My wife started showing symptoms of indigestion, weakness, abdominal pain. After my wife was diagnosed with mesothelioma, we did an exhaustive survey of the places she could have been exposed. The sources ranged from things like building materials on the house, brake linings on cars and trucks, possibly even things that were in the soil, vermiculite, that sort of thing. But in my opinion, the overwhelming exposure was due to the clothes that I wore home from work. In those days, I was working in power plants, and a lot of asbestos was used for insulation, and it was not all that regarded as dangerous. And in my jobs, I came home with enough asbestos on my clothes that if you shake my clothes, they'd make a cloud. And she did my laundry, and I'm relatively sure that was her strongest exposure. The course of feeling ill to getting the right diagnosis until she died was about 9 months.
Most people were exposed to asbestos and never knew they were actually being exposed. They weren't told there was asbestos in the product. They were never informed there might be a danger associated with the product. So most people have an exposure for which, when they're first asked the question, they won't be able to identify the exposure, but in reality they've had a lot of exposure.
The prognosis for mesothelioma patients depends largely on how early and aggressively it's treated. Treatments are costly and include surgery, radiation therapy, and chemotherapy. For Paul Sizz and thousands of others, the battle against mesothelioma continues.
I feel very well. I think as long as I can keep up my activities and my health, I think I'll feel pretty good. And I think financially we're going to be okay. So there's really no reason for me to feel down and out. I feel very positive that I can't beat it, but I'm going to give it a hard time before it beats me.
The O'Brien Law Firm fights for the victims of asbestos-related diseases. For 2 decades, the attorneys at the O'Brien Law Firm have successfully represented victims in Missouri, Illinois, and the Midwest.
The mission of the O'Brien Law Firm is simple: to deliver quality legal representation to mesothelioma victims of asbestos disease. And we really achieve that by just relying on 2 core values: total commitment to each and every client, and making sure our clients get the respect and the dignity they deserve.
The award-winning team at the O'Brien Law Firm knows how devastating a mesothelioma diagnosis can be for victims and their families. Between lost paychecks and mounting medical expenses, mesothelioma patients need help, and the companies responsible for asbestos exposure need to be held accountable.
My father was exposed to asbestos through his employer. He was basically a laborer, just a regular factory worker. He had told family members he was going in for some tests, and they had to perform surgery on him. And when we got to the hospital, the doctors was going over the surgery with the immediate family, and they told us that the lower part of his body was just completely filled with cancer. When my father passed away, there were quite a few expenditures that were out there: doctor bills, medical bills, nursing home. The O'Brien Law Firm have just been absolutely wonderful to myself, my mother, and my family in terms of support, emotionally, financially. I mean, they've just been spectacular. I mean, they've been wonderful.
I'd recommend the O'Brien Law Firm for 2 reasons. One is the staff that they have. The people are very attuned to the mesothelioma patients and what they're going through and how they can help them. The second thing is I'm amazed at their skill in putting together suits that will have the mesothelioma patients have some financial recovery. It amazes me as to what they've been able to do. It was more than I would ever have expected.
The loss of my wife has been tremendous to our family. She was the matriarch. The bills were overwhelming, and if it weren't for getting a decision in the courts, yeah, they would have been even more overwhelming. I was introduced to the O'Brien Law Firm through my work, through my union, and they were handling several cases similar to mine, and they made me aware that there were other people that had the same sort of case and that we could pursue this in the courts and possibly get a decision. I think one of the main reasons I would recommend the O'Brien Law Firm is because their experience in this field and the treatment I've gotten in my case. They made me feel human. It wasn't just a case.
I would recommend the O'Brien Law Firm because they do give you hope. They stay right on top of it. They don't leave anything to chance. They sit right down with you. They discuss what is happening, what perhaps they can do for you, what they can do for your family, and I appreciated that.
The future of the O'Brien Law Firm is dictated by what happens to people as regards the diagnosis of mesothelioma. We believe, and the science is, that people will continue to get diagnosed with mesothelioma for 10, 20 years to come. So we're going to be here to represent those people as they get diagnosed one by one. And lastly, we want to participate in the public debate that's going on about mesothelioma. Has it gone away? It hasn't. It needs people to bring that voice to the table. Ongoing medical research needs to go on so people can get treatment for that disease in the future. It's not over, it's still a problem.
If you or someone you love may be the victim of asbestos exposure, contact the O'Brien Law Firm. Visit us at o'brienlawfirm.com.